the delay, had representations from the CAM water campaign. So, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to Cambridge City Council's Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. This includes members here in the chamber, those attending virtually, and those members of the public who are watching the live stream via the Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Simon Smith, and I am the chair of this committee meeting, taking place at 5:30 p.m. on the 22nd of June 2022. Please can those present in the Council and Chamber note, everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, could be broadcast at some time. If you are following the team meeting here in the chamber on your laptop, your audio, microphone and camera must be switched off. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so those in the chamber are requested to wait a couple of seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. If the fire alarm sounds, please follow officers who will leave the chamber and make your way down the stairs to the assembly point. Please do not use the lift. Please can those participating in the Teams meeting indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column. Please do not use the chat column for any other purpose. Please ensure that you've switched off or silenced any other devices you have so they do not interrupt proceedings. When you're invited to address the meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. When you finish addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately. Speak slowly and clearly, and please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. I will now roll call councillors alphabetically by surname so the public can see who they are. Please advise if you know any apologies from other councillors when I ask you to speak. Are you there, Councillor Bagent?
I am, Chair.
Councillor Bick?
I am here.
Councillor Davies?
Here.
Councillor Herbert? Councillor Pora?
Present, Chair.
Councillor Scott?
Most assuredly, I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Smart?
Present.
And Councillor Swift?
Present.
Any people I haven't mentioned who are present? Thank you. We are also joined by Executive Councillor for Planning Policy and Infrastructure, Councillor Thornborough, who's up there
present.
In the gallery. On each agenda item, and after hearing the deliberation of the Scrutiny Committee, if required, it is responsibility of the Executive Councillor to make the formal decision. The officers permanently at the table for this meeting are Joint Director for Planning and Economic Development, Stephen Kelly.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Committee Manager, Claire Tunnicliffe.
Thank you, Chair.
And Meeting Producer, Boris Herzog. The committee will receive an oral presentation from officers. Members of the committee will then discuss the report and vote on the recommendations. As chair, if the vote is split, I will have the casting vote. Following the vote of the committee, the Executive Councillor will be asked if they are minded to agree with the decision. So, are there any apologies for absence? Moving to agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Please could committee members declare if they have any declarations of interest and identify which agenda item their declaration relates to. Councillor Bagent.
Member of the Cambridge Cycling Campaign, Chair.
Are there any other declarations of interest? I'll turn to agenda item 3, the minutes of the meeting of the 11th of January 2022 meeting. They've been submitted to this meeting for approval. If there are any concerns, please could members raise them now, otherwise they should be approved as a correct record. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? In that case, the minutes can be approved as a correct record. Agenda item 4, public questions. We have no public speakers, so we'll move to agenda item 5. The first item is the interim approach to biodiversity net gain. For this item, we're joined by the Head of New Communities, Jane Green. Welcome, Jane. John Cornell. It's John.
Hello.
As the Natural Environment Team Leader. And is Guy present? Okay, it's not him. Guy, I will mention him. Guy Belcher, Nature Conservation Projects Officer, is a co-author of these reports. So I believe that John Cornell, Natural Environment Team Leader, will introduce this item. John, could you please begin?
Yeah. So, as has been said, I'm the Natural Environment Team Leader for Greater Cambridge Shared Planning, and I manage the tree team, the ecology team, and the landscape architecture team within the planning department. And we're bringing this item on biodiversity net gain and the off-site approach to biodiversity net gain because of changes to the legislation coming forward next year. So, under the Environment Act 2021, all planning permissions granted in England under the Town and Country Planning Act will have to deliver 10% biodiversity net gain from next year, November 2023. Biodiversity net gain, or BNG, will be used measuring DEFRA's biodiversity metric, and habitats will need to be secured for 30 years. This sits alongside a strengthened legal duty for public bodies to conserve and enhance biodiversity, new biodiversity reporting requirements for local authorities, and mandatory spatial strategies for nature, such as local nature recovery strategies. So just to recap, biodiversity net gain is an approach which aims to leave the environment in a measurably better condition than it was before any development took place. So in November 2023, or prior to it, DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, will announce guidance on how BNG will work, what the reporting oversights will be, and what the mechanisms will be to manage that. However, November 2023 is 17 months away, and in Greater Cambridge, development planning continues, so we need a credible interim approach to biodiversity net gain in order to prepare the council, our planners, local developments to be day one ready for that. This interim guidance that we're introducing is intended to be used between now and November 2023, when government guidance will emerge, but until then, we really don't have anything, we're guessing. So the interim guidance before you today represents an effort to craft a balanced approach to citing biodiversity net gain, taking a steer from the Environment Act and the Lawton Principles, which came out in 2012 for better connected, larger scale and better quality biodiversity. And so what the approach proposes is that at all times, biodiversity net gain should follow the mitigation hierarchy. And so at all times, the first attempt should be to deliver biodiversity net gain within the development boundary, within the red line boundary. That's the first principle. However, we know from previous planning development that this isn't always possible. In fact, sometimes it's just really very difficult to do that. So the question arises, if that's the case, where do we cite this net gain that we know we have to deliver? And what the interim approach proposes is a sort of a staged approach to that, which steps you through the various options for delivering biodiversity net gain. Option one is that you deliver on site. However, if you can't deliver on site, option two is suggested that you deliver biodiversity net gain at what we're calling a strategic offset site, or a habitat bank within the same priority landscape area. These are suggested in, I think, map 2 of the attachment that we've presented, that the committee has, I'm sorry. Option 3 would be to place the biodiversity net gain locally, or more local to the site at which the harm is taking place, perhaps close to development within the community, put it that way. Option 4 might see a combination of local mitigation and possibly, if it can't all be met locally for constraints, we'd take some of it and put it at a strategic site. So you meet your whole requirement, but you split that. And option 5, which isn't actually yet available, is that the government will have credits that you can buy off the shelf. And that will be the easy option and probably not the preferred approach, because buying something off the shelf from government will mean that mitigation can take place anywhere. And we're not quite clear on how that's going to work, but that will be another option. So they're the options that we have for off-site approach. What we've done in this particular report is we've included a couple of examples, local examples, of advanced creation habitat banks, which are being set up in Greater Cambridge. That's on the last page of the report. One of these is just outside Fulbourn in a location called Lower Valley Farm. Another one is closer to Wandleberry Country Park. And what we anticipate will happen will be these things are going to spring up everywhere if we're not careful. And so we need an approach which is consistent, standardised, credible, thought through. And that's what we brought to you today as an interim approach. Happy to take questions.
Thank you for that, John. So now move to members' questions. Could I ask you to raise your hand and then press your microphone when you are asked to speak? Sam Davis, thank you.
Thank you. On page 45, where you're talking about the options for local wildlife sites as an alternative, you then say sites in private ownership that are in poor condition may be suitable for BNG contributions for enhancement. Is there any concern that that's actually going to create an incentive for people to not bother looking after their own sites because they know they can get topped up by developers, or am I being unduly cynical?
Being unduly cynical. One of the problems or one of the challenges that we face is that because this hasn't been fully thought through by DEFRA, because we don't have a complete set of guidance, we are, I wouldn't say making it up as we go, we're taking peer-reviewed guidance from Natural England, Planning Advisory Service, other local authorities. In that specific case, I think there is, or there are opportunities for sites to be put forward for G, but also to attract funding from other sources. So I think that the level of scrutiny that we are going to need to ensure that this is managed and monitored properly is going to be high. And that's why DEFRA have identified this as a new burden on the council. It's not something that we can just sort of proceed as normal. We will have to have systems. So I suppose the point in getting this interim guidance in place is that we have between now and next November to test if it works and to see where the holes are. So that's a good enough answer, but yeah, lots of challenges.
Thank you, Jack. That is a concerning answer. It's a concerning question and a concerning answer. Councillor Pora.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, obviously very much welcome this interim approach until we have more certainty as to what's going to happen in 17 months. I think we've all said this before, but my main concern is to still maintain the priority on site, because again, it's that issue that what I would, and I hope, obviously I know officers are keen to do this as well, But my concern is slightly that, you know, developers will say, oh, option 1, nah, not going to do that, just going to move to option 2, 3 or 4. And I think I'd welcome sort of reassurances that we will be robust on that. And particularly that if we are off-siting it, that it isn't at the expense of other open space or greenery. You know, I appreciate we're probably all singing from the same hymn sheet, but I think it's important to raise, because particularly with the off-the-shelf idea from governments, that's particularly concerning about where that's going to go, whether it's even going to come back to our area or the specific development, because I know we're very keen with our planning hats on to make sure that the benefits are local to the development, so that the people who had it offset can actually still access it. So yes, I'd just be grateful if you could confirm that we are still taking a very strong line that we want it on site where we can, and that, you know, it's not a trade-off to build more things and just off-site it. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor, that's certainly the intention. And if members are supportive of this approach, the proposition is also going through the South Cambs Cabinet. And then following that, we would be doing some training of planning officers and planning committees, explaining to them you know, what the principles are, what we're trying to achieve. But as you well know, that planners are well versed in trying to ensure mitigation actually happens on site.
Councillor Smart.
So, sitting on planning committee as I do, I'm aware that some sites might not even be desirable or possible to get biodiversity net gain. But that's a separate point, I guess, to my question, which is, what can officers let us know what weight they feel that planning committee, and for that matter, planning officers, if it's a delegated decision, should apply to this piece of guidance? And I suppose I'm especially thinking of myself in planning committee in that respect, but both answers would be good.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's a very important question, and the achievement of biodiversity net gain is a component of sustainable development, which the government's confirmed through the NPPF is an objective and purpose of planning. So you can give weight to the delivery of the objectives, but as you know, it's not yet part of the local, the emerging local plan policy framework, and so that does tend to diminish the substantive weight that you can give to in a planning decision. However, what John and Jane have outlined is that by being really clear on how commitments to biodiversity net gain within a planning application or within the planning application process can be achieved, what we're hoping to be able to do is to optimise the weight, both from a development perspective in terms of developers who make commitments, holding them to account and making sure that it's deliverable, but also from a wider understanding basis, helping communities to understand what a decision that may well include consideration of biodiversity net gain through this framework, what that will give rise to. Whether or not, I don't think until we have an adopted local plan in place, or indeed, as John says, until the Environment Act obligations become mandatory through in November 2023, it's likely to be something that would be the turning point of a planning decision. So you wouldn't be able to refuse an application solely because it wasn't delivering this. But you are able to give the benefit associated with the achievement of biodiversity net gain. And that weighs in the planning balance as a component in favour of granting permission, all other things being equal. So it's a positive, we would argue, particularly in this framework. It's something that is a material planning consideration. It's something you can give weight to, having regard to its potential positive contribution. So for those developments that may well be marginal or have very finely balanced planning judgments, what we're trying to provide through this framework is a way in which that sometimes unquantified commitment to biodiversity net gain that you may well find can be properly realised and confidently delivered in Greater Cambridge. So as a planning committee, you can have confidence and some weight to it. But as I said, it would not be weight that would be pivotal on its own to a planning decision. John, I don't know whether you wish to comment further.
Very much. Just to add to that, to be absolutely clear about the current legislation and what's going to change, under NPPF, you do have to currently deliver net gain for biodiversity. You just don't have, there's no figure attached to that. You haven't told us 5%, 10%, 3%, it's just net gain. So you need to put back more than you take. What changes next year, in November next year, is that there will be a mandatory 10% net gain. And so what we're trying to, the place that we're trying to get to, as Stephen's correctly laid out, is we're trying to get up to speed with how that's going to work. So it's going to be quite a leap to go from just delivering a bit of net gain here and there to 10%. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you look at development, what might be taken, and therefore what you might need to mitigate for, it's going to be a stretch. So we need to work that muscle and get ourselves into a position where it's something that we can deliver confidently. And just to come back to an earlier point, sorry, I won't be greedy with my time, but all developments in Greater Cambridge should always seek to deliver high quality green infrastructure, accessible green natural spaces, trees, soft edges. That's just best practice. So, and actually can count towards biodiversity net gain, but it probably won't account for the whole 10% when we're trying to get to that point. So we do need to work that muscle and come up to speed. Thank you, Chair.
I've got some questions. The first question is, what happens after 30 years?
Yeah, and I saw your questions earlier, and I sent some answers across, but I think, just refresh my memory from, okay, now this is hot on the press from our ecologists, so hopefully it's accurate. Okay, the theory is that after 30 years of management, sites will be in such good condition because they would have been managed for biodiversity for 3 decades, that there's absolutely no way that they would be, following the guidance that's going to come through, they wouldn't be appropriate for any kind of development because the uplift on these amazing sites would be humongous. So the assumption is, and it is an assumption, that 30 years of good management for biodiversity will provide sites which are just, there's no way that they're going to be developed. It'll be the same as SSSIs or the sorts of protected sites that we have now. So that's how we get around that one.
And second question is, how these sites will these sites qualify for funding from the new agricultural subsidy regimes which are emerging post-CAP?
Okay, now I think you're talking about ELMS, which is the new, what's going to take over from the European subsidy. I'm going to pass on that because it's not expertise. It sits outside of our planning remit. I suspect there will be overlap, but again, we're not quite sure how that's going to work. I'm not sure if Stephen or others might have a view on that, but it's a bit unclear at the moment.
Next question. If we were looking at the totality of the benefit for wildlife habitat and climate, should we really be looking at large-scale off-site strategic habitat banks? So ones which can be self-sustaining but also be important places for carbon capture, rather than just having really lots of local, small.
The short answer, so strategic sites deliver much greater benefits because of economies of scale. So strategic sites deliver, we're talking about strategic sites, we can think about advanced habitat creation of the kind that's taking place at Wandleberry, Low Valley Farm, other places where they're doing this kind of thing. But they do offer, as I've said, economies of scale, connectivity across a landscape. They offer just more practical management and monitoring opportunities than if we were to have hundreds of smaller sites dotted all over the place, which I'm sure you can appreciate would be a greater burden for monitoring, because the local authority, whether it's in a smaller site or whether it's in a larger strategic site, the local authority will need to monitor and manage that monitoring over that 30-year period. So it just makes more sense from a management perspective. In terms of carbon sequestration obviously will form part of any kind of vegetative growth, but it's seen as a sort of a secondary benefit. It's not the primary benefit for biodiversity net gain. That's biodiversity. But of course, yes, carbon sequestration through plants and soils will be a benefit.
How is that analysis weighed in the hierarchy that you're proposing? Because what we need to be looking at is a whole life cycle of cost to the local authority and for the environmental benefits. And is this hierarchy one that's going to minimise the cost and maximise the benefits? That's the question.
So costs are factored into development costs. So I think we had a question the other day about taxpayers picking up, the council picking up. Biodiversity net gain will be wholly funded by developers. So cost of the council should be zero or negligible. I mean, we haven't done forecasts of costs, but in reality, which is why the costs are so high, developers must come to the table with a costed plan for 30 years that's transparent, involves governance, involves monitoring. They pick up the bill. So there shouldn't be any burden on the public purse.
Can I just add to that comment? Because clearly the delivery mechanism for some of this is going to be through the planning process in terms of planning permissions. John's quite right in that what we will be looking for as the local planning authority is the monitoring costs associated with these habitats being in the way that Section 106 monitoring is already a legitimate area for contributions. The point around scale, though, I think goes beyond just a financial efficiency point or an expediency point from the planning authority. The joint local plan started to look at and Natural Cambridgeshire and the organisations that the council's engaging with about Greater Cambridge as a whole has some fantastic opportunities at scale to do not only habitat enhancement but also landscape repair and some very significant linked opportunities for habitat creation that you simply don't get if you disperse that and disaggregate it. So although from both a monitoring and a delivery perspective, there is merit in taking a view of strategic sites, the fundamental benefit, and I think it'll be the first time for a very long time that we will see the council's evidence base come to life in terms of the green infrastructure work that was done over 10 years ago, but which has been very difficult to see resolved and transformed. The reason for the paper is to help us to bake into planning decisions sooner rather than later that transition or the move towards that transition, and to make sure that we're capturing the costs. But I want to stress the point: it's not a financial expediency argument. It's a fundamentally sound way of approaching widespread, and the local plan is 360 odd square miles, but wide scale landscape and biodiversity enrichment.
And I mean, just adding to that, it's...
Sorry.
You're just messing about my papers. I think added to that, there will be a lot of learning through this process, Councillor Davis and Paula, so that this local planning authority is in a position to advise DEFRA on the emerging guidance and, if you like, rules and regulations because of of course, there will be pirates on board trying to game the system. And so I think the point that's been made that there does need to be strict regulation of these habitat banks is well made and heard. And we will be hearing reports back in due course on how this is going in practice. So thank you for making those points. Councillor Scott.
Thank you for a very interesting report. It's much appreciated. I just want to ask a question. Under your paragraph 3 headed background, you speak about X, Y, and Z before moving to more local community-led solutions. And then on page 44, again, there's a reference to, I did see it, community-led, no, here it's at 3 on page 45. If no bespoke strategic site or habitat bank solution is available, etc. You go on to talk about local community-led BNG schemes. And I just wanted to ask, when you're speaking about local community-led schemes, what do you have in mind in terms of the scale of local community-led schemes? Because it's just that we're very well aware that there are many local communities within Cambridge, for example, that want to be involved in biodiversity schemes. And I'm wondering if that's the sort of community involvement you're speaking of, or if it's something broader than just local resident involvement in biodiversity schemes. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So we wrote this clearly with Greater Cambridge in mind, and as you know, Greater Cambridge is the city and it's the district of South Cambs. And so from a South Cambs perspective, we can talk about parishes. Parishes have land, not always a lot, but they have bits and pieces. If we're going to zoom in to the city, it presents us with a spatial question, because communities within the city just don't have the same kind of land holdings that parishes have. So the kind of scale that you would be able to deliver within the boundary of the city would be much smaller. And in terms of where that might be delivered, I don't have any, I really don't have any off the top of my head answers for you. You know, communities within, Katie's got her hand up, so sorry, Councillor. Probably, would you like to speak to this rather than me babble on? Okay, all right, over to you then.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Scott. There was one example I'd like to mention in Cambridge was 6 council homes were being built on Wadlows Road, and it was it's quite a small site, but it had quite a lot of sort of saplings had grown on the site, and therefore it's quite high in biodiversity. And what happened here was to enable the 6 homes to be built, there was a community, part of the application was to include off-site to an adjacent open green space, and it was a planned to be a community project led by our ecologists, and that resulted in something like a 35% net gain overall. So they're small projects, but they can be very beneficial for biodiversity and the community. So we have small open spaces around the place. They may be appropriate for community nature projects, and that's the sort of thing that could be considered.
Thank you. Very, very much appreciated.
Councillor Pora.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to check on page 44. It's talking about how we verify the accuracy of the biodiversity calculations, going back to mapping from 2021. So I just want to check my understanding. So in effect, were we, for example, to find a site that had suddenly become quite unbiodiverse, we can go back and say, actually, a year ago, you had this many trees. And are we confident that we've got enough data? I mean, I'm thinking the equivalent of the Google map where you can see what biodiversity was there, because I think that's very useful, certainly for members on planning committee to know those kind of things. Thanks.
Yeah, So we would typically have things like aerial photography, which we do have going back many years. More recent evidence like maybe Google Maps, a bit generic, but you're absolutely right, the baseline has been set for January 2020, and of course the method of establishing the baseline is the dephrometric 3.1, which is industry standard. It's a national standard that's been rolled out by the government as the method of not just establishing the baseline, but measuring the uplift afterwards. So, and the reason for that is that in the past, we've seen developers come to the table with sort of, bits and pieces of, well, we think it's done this way. So no, there's going to be a standard approach to all of this.
We now take the matter to the vote. Okay, so the recommendation is on page 40 of your agenda paper. The Executive Council is recommended to endorse this interim approach to citing biodiversity net gain for developments across Cambridge, and to note and welcome the emerging habitat banks in Greater Cambridge, with delegated powers given to the Joint Planning Director of Planning and Economic Development to make main changes to the technical note at Appendix A. All those in favour, please raise your hand.
Unanimous, Chair.
I ask the, yeah. So can I ask the Executive Council to? Executive Council, can you agree that recommendation?
Thank you very much. I accept your recommendation. Thank the ecology team very much for all the hard work. I know this is going to have an immediate impact. We have people wanting to build and also to provide more net gain as soon as possible. So this will hopefully benefit sites and local green space and identified areas of special nature to improve. Thank you very much.
Councillor Thornborough. So thank you very much for the presentation and answers to, that's really excellent. And thank you for attending this evening. So on behalf of the committee, thank you very much. Now turn to agenda item 6 on page 57 of your agenda. This is the Greater Cambridge Local Development Scheme and Greater Cambridge Local Plan First Proposals representations. I understand the presenting officers will be the Planning Policy Manager, John Dixon. Welcome, John. Presenting the Greater Cambridge Local Plan First Proposals part of the report. And Caroline Hunt, Strategy and Economy Manager, will lead on the Local Development Scheme. Welcome, Caroline. John, would you like to start with the introductions and begin? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this section of the report really is to report that we have now published all the comments and feedback we have received through the first proposals consultation. You may cast your mind back to November and December last year when we consulted on the first proposals. That set out the Council's preferred approach to the development strategy, including the amount of development, where it should be planned for, and how it should be planned for, including a range of policies around some what we called big themes that have guided the plan-making process up to this point. It wasn't a draft plan. It's very much seeking views on the policies and the alternatives we had considered before we move on to preparing the plan, and Caroline will pick up that process in the second part of this report. The consultation was wide-ranging. We tried, again, lots of new methods online. We used all the social media platforms available to the Council, including a very well-watched short video advertising the consultation. We had a series of online webinars on the key topics of the plan, and this time they were interactive, so we were actually able to have some feedback during those sessions. But also we did get out and about and highlight and speak to the community. So I have to say, during the consultation, for most days, we're consulting. Some members of the team were out somewhere meeting the public, so it was a really busy time. In terms of the overall feedback we've received, there's really 4 channels we've captured the results in, and they're summarised in a lot more detail in the Appendix A to your report, which provides a report on the consultation. The most detailed comments we received online through the website and often via email or paper have been registered on what's called our Opus Consult system, which is a database where we attribute comments and can store comments against the individual elements of the plan. And what you can see there is some examples from the website, and you can scroll through each section and review the individual comments online, including all the additional documents people have submitted as well. And we received around 4,100 comments from 625 respondents across the whole range of issues in the plan. Also wanted to make this a very accessible consultation, so we also included a quick survey which included some key questions about the consultation with a really quick online questionnaire, and we've captured all those results from the about 600 people that filled in the questionnaire in a spreadsheet which you can view on the website as well. Still in the relatively early stages of the plan, we are still receiving comments on sites we did put forward, but also sites we didn't, and in some cases we have received information on sites we'd already tested, including new evidence, and we will be very much looking through all those comments in detail, and also a number of new sites. On the website, there is an interactive map where you can view all the information received on every site, including all those new ones where you can load and unload different map layers to see what's come in. We also, in the Appendix 1 report, have notes from officers who attended all the events, trying to capture a flavour of the sort of issues they experienced when they were there, and that includes events where we went to youth groups, particular sessions focused on gypsy and traveller audiences and so on, trying to reach those hard to reach groups. So as a package, we've got a huge amount of information and evidence to be pouring through. To emphasise, this is very much the start of our process dealing with the comments. What we're highlighting to you today is that we have published the comments for viewing. We know we've got much more work to do now, poring over those issues, drawing out the points, and as officers, we'll be required to look at how we respond to those points and come back to discuss with members how we move forward to the next stages. We have put together, on the next slide, a very brief summary of the key issue, but that's a real challenge. How do you summarise that volume of issues in a slide? I would say, in terms of the overall aims and objectives and the vision for the plan, there was generally support for what we were aiming to achieve. On the development strategy, there was a lot of comments expressing concern about the overall volume of development, and we did have a number of representations really focused on the water issues, which were highlighted in the consultation by the councils. But there were other comments highlighting that perhaps we weren't planning for enough homes and jobs, including those promoting sites in many cases. Looking at the overall approach to sites, there was general support for quite a focused approach, looking at how we could respond to climate change, focusing development where it could access transport and so on. There were a lot of comments on very specific sites, and when you look at the report, you'll see there are comments on all of them, but some more than others. And a particular view coming out from many site promoters was whether our plan was actually too focused. Should we have had more development scattered around the villages rather than having such a focused approach? There was a lot of support in our theme policies for the approaches we've taken, with strong approaches on climate change, well-being, health and so on. But challenges from developers regarding viability in particular, or whether we were justified in trying to move away or be stronger in some cases than the national government policy. So that really is an absolute snapshot. This is very much the start of the process, and we hope to work with members as we move forward, looking at all the issues raised as we move forward to drafting the plan. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor.
First of all, I want to say the Milton Youth Club, that was a part of this project, wasn't it? I'm in the right part of the report, aren't I, here? I just thought it was fantastic that they want more shops, not just Tesco, and that in the summer they wanted to know why the goalposts were removed from the football field when they still want to pay. I want to know too. I thought that was just wonderful though. Good on you for doing that. But I just want to ask actually two questions. I saw that in what people wanted for priorities, one was safe streets where children can play outside. And I just wondered if in housing development there'd been thought given to, I can't remember what it's called, but it's a particular planning idea where there's a cul-de-sac with houses built round the cul-de-sac, and then out the back of every house there's land which is common to all houses so that children can play on the land at the back rather than in the street. I do have to confess that in one development of which I'm aware, where this was the plan, the children actually preferred to play in the street, not in the back that was all programmed for the children to play. But still there would be a possibility, I think, if that level of planning were addressed, then one could encourage the children to play in the back of the houses in this common ground. So that's number one, whether attention's been paid to that sort of planning. But number two, the census has just come out, which indicates that Cambridge population has absolutely skyrocketed in terms of what the population was when this local plan was first begun to be developed. And it's increased by 25,000 to 28,000. So I'm wondering how that will be factored in to this local planning in the light of the fact that the local plan has already been developed to a certain extent. And then here comes the realisation that there's so many more people here proportionately. Thank you.
So on the first point, yeah, it's great to pull out specific feedback and thoughts arising from the views, and we will very much be looking to do the same and draw those points out. So in the consultation, we have absolutely clear theme on great places which set out some ideas regarding design policies. So what we will now need to do is go over all that feedback and think, well, what should the policy in the draft plan look like, drawing on this feedback? How can we take that on board and make it work for places going forward and provide the right guidance for sites as they come in to planning? So I'm glad you've got used to the feedback already, so we will very much be looking at that. On the second point, clearly when the first proposals were developed, a lot of work on looking at the future need for homes and what was going to be happening to the population, and that very much guided how the plan was developed. Clearly, as time goes on, we do get new information, including the census, and I think we've also said we need to make sure we're taking account of issues such as coming out of COVID, Brexit, and all the other issues. So we are actually looking at making sure we have the most up-to-date information regarding our housing needs, jobs growth and so on going forward, and we have commissioned that work in order that it can inform the next stages we work with you towards the draft plan as we go forward in the year.
Councillor Thornbury, did you want to make a comment in respect of this?
Yes, please. I'd just like to pick up on the first question you made, Councillor Scott, about shared playing areas. That is actually what happens at the Marmalade Lane development, where each dwelling has a private space, amenity space, and then shared amenity space. It's a great example of a different way that for designing a community, and it's won lots of awards. We're all very interested in it, and I think councillors should, we could arrange a visit there, because it's, as well as this shared open space, they've got shared laundries and shared bike repair workshops and things like that. And lessons from that community will feed into the policies that we look at going forward.
Just on the population growth point, there will be an opportunity to update the local plan when we get to the Regulation 19 stage, when new evidence will be considered. Councillor Bick now.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Yep, okay. I wanted to, first of all, say that the report reflects a huge amount of work that went into this consultation phase. And I think some recognition and thanks needs to be offered to officers for what was a really stupendous and energetic range of events and opportunities to contribute. And I think the rest of the process is going to be the richer for it. So having said that, John said that the with sort of some almost exhaustion that we've now published it all, and of course that's obviously the case, but it is, I think, for us lay people incredibly indigestible at this point, in that it is very raw, and what we've got in this report is a very light narrative description, which doesn't really help us to analyze or assess what we've got back. And I see in the papers that the intention is that we will get an analysis together with officers' conclusions in January, which is great and will involve whole lot of work for them. But the way that will work for members is that we will get about 10 days to look at what will then be a massive amount of documentation. And I wonder whether there is a way of phasing this over the period between now and then, where we are able, as a committee of members scrutinising this exercise, actually to look at the plan segment by segment of the plan in some detail, rather than waiting for the whole thing to be assembled and done and then dumped on us together, in which it becomes very difficult for people to pull out particular points amidst what will be a vast number of points by that stage.
Councillor Bick, and who's going to attempt to answer that question?
Chair, I just start that. Caroline's going to come on to talk about the programme after this, and you're right, Councillor Bick, that there is a huge amount of content there to digest. The intention of publishing it wasn't in any respects to kind of bamboozle anybody, but was in order that for those people who are interested, firstly in either a specific policy or a specific topic or what have you, they could, rather than wait for officers to tell them what they should think about a matter, they could see for themselves that. And part of where we're going, having published this, we're not, as Jonathan's quite clear, we're not drawing any conclusions from it for you at this stage, but it's to also help inform the discussion that through the Joint Local Plan Advisory Group will take place as we look to try and dig down into, as you've highlighted, potentially a number of themes associated with the process, but also to allow those who are interested on a particular topic to also understand what people have said and form their own views. So I think rather than this committee doesn't meet frequently enough to take a topic by topic basis and allow, particularly with the kind of reporting expectations that might exist around that, and allow us to, I think, get through the work that needs to be done. But we are looking at a programme for the Joint Local Plan Advisory Group in which we can cut some of this down into a more digestible size by theme, and which under those themes, members involved in that process can also then see the full panoply of what people have said, rather than get a filtered, or some might claim biased, kind of perspective from the way that officers respond to it. In as practical way as possible, we are trying to find a way of helping the next, particularly the next year or so, as we head towards the next iteration of the local plan document. We're looking to try and find it's more digestible and allowing everybody and anybody to delve into the detail of specifics of what people have really put forward, rather than, as John has highlighted, to try and even distill it into 50 slides would be a very significant task.
Councillor Bigg, if you want to follow that up at all.
Well, yeah, that's that's a helpful response. I just want to check that I've understood right, though, that the actual access that we can look through and sort of browse for, in our own time at what has been said, seems to be really difficult to do that with. It's a spreadsheet, I think, with the link that's in this report somewhere, which is almost it's almost impossible to look at on a computer screen. And I'm just wondering whether, have I misunderstood, or is that it? Is there already an easier way to look through it than that?
So there are a number of forms of feedback, as we said. So on the Opus Consult system, which can be found directly from the Greater Cambridge Planning website, you effectively can scroll through the consultation, and next to each proposal that was consulted on, view the full detailed comments that were registered, including a summary of the comments, their full text submission, and any documents they submitted. And in terms of new sites, we have a list of the sites on the website with a link to the details, but also the interactive map where you can actually click on the site you're interested in. It will take you to the site record, and again you can see the details of the site that was submitted and any documents they've submitted to support their proposal. The quick survey, the form of those results as they come back from that survey monkey type system, does mean they are in more simple form. Of course, what we need to do is make sure we do draw out all those comments when we're doing the more detailed summary by issue, as Stephen mentioned, to work with members going forward. But we do try and make the information accessible on the website. Any feedback you have to make, any points, I'm glad to look into it.
Thank you.
Councillor Bagent and then Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of comments and then a question. None of it very sophisticated. I'm really interested on page 86, where we ask people about how new developments should mainly focus on sites where car travel, and how 68% of the respondents agreed, or strongly agreed, that we should discourage car travel and car use. And this shows a really strong support for this aspect of the strategy, is the comment by the officers. I think this is a really innocent piece of data that shows that the City Council are pursuing the right lines, that we are following the way that our residents want to go, our interested residents, because we are trying to reduce cars in the city and we're trying to support the reduction in climate change. So our agenda is clearly, by this piece of data, innocently interpreted, shows that we're on the same side as the people, which is where everybody wants to be. I'd also like to comment on page 88, where we asked people what we should prioritise when we were planning homes. And the two highest chosen things were energy and water efficiency and safe streets where children can play. And I think that's really heartening. It's, again, another innocent indication of where we're going is the right direction. Ignoring along the way, almost one of the lowest one, private car parking, and lifting quite high secure cycle parking. I think these sorts of bits of data really give us heart about what we're thinking about. My question is, we asked, this is the one that I found a little bit less palatable. We talked about building 550 homes a year. This is on page 86 again. And 54% of the people disagreed or strongly disagreed with that. And I think that's saddening, because we know, and this survey pointed out clearly, that we have to build homes. I just wondered if there was any interpretation by the officers of what that actually means when 54% of the population sampled, of course, disagreed, or 68% of, no, 54% of the population disagreed, 30% of the population agreed, and 16% actually didn't bother, were neutral, didn't answer the question properly. I just think that doesn't lead you in a sort of very positive direction. I just wonder if you have any views on it, one of the officers, some of the officers.
The clear point is we now have this huge package of feedback to work through, and we can use it to help guide our thinking. There's going to be clearly opinions we consider, but also we need to continue to explore the evidence. Shall we weigh all the issues up before we make the plan? I think it's important we also view the whole package of views that have come into us. So not only have we got the quick survey results, we also have got a lot of feedback through those Opus Consult detailed comments and a huge amount of views both for and against, including evidence both for and against in that process. So we need to make sure we clearly examine all the issues very carefully, and reflecting what was discussed earlier, we absolutely need to continue to have those debates and explore the issues really carefully.
Councillor Bajent, if you look at page 78, and you'll see the age profile of the respondents, and it could be possible that some of those respondents wouldn't be so interested in jobs because they're at the point of retirement. It just could be one factor in the stats that you're looking at. Are you satisfied your answers, your statements have been heard and your questions have been answered? That's good.
Sorry for not using the mic.
I'm going to go to Councillor Davies next, and then I'm going to Councillor Herbert, who's got his hand up, his electronic hand, and his arm is hurting, apparently. And then to you, Councillor Pora. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously what you've given us is a bit kind of he said, she said, which is fair enough at this point in the proceedings. So I'm actually more interested in the description of the process and what we can learn from that, because we're going to need to run a similar exercise again at the next stage. And I appreciate it's difficult because Hannah Loftus was kind of the mastermind behind a lot of this, and she's not with us anymore. But some of the feedback I got as a ward councillor was about lack of access to physical copies. And you say that there are only 2 copies, one in Camborne Library and one in Central Library. I'm interested in the degree of digital engagement with this process. I'm interested in how digital responses can be boosted by access to physical materials, because I tried the quick questionnaire. I could do the questionnaire bit fine, but then going on and doing what was suggested and referring to the evidence was much harder off a phone. So I don't know if there's a kind of complementary digital plus physical approach we can take next time. The other comment really is when we come to presenting the information, the comments and the responses in more detail. I think for precisely the point that Councillor Bajent raised about this edge of opposition to or suspicion about housing, it's going to be really important that those responses are broken out by, as far as possible, by the type of respondent, so resident versus industry, basically. And I'm hoping that will be possible given the way you've captured the data.
Respond, please.
It's always really helpful to have feedback on the consultation because, as you mentioned, we do always try and look at what we can do better, where we can improve. It's interesting feedback on the physical docket. I would say that we always say and would always urge that if anyone has trouble viewing a document, can't find it, by all means contact us, and we do try and put that on everything we produce. I've had a lot of experience over the years about where we put hard copies, some of it good, some of it bad, some of it where it hasn't been any benefit at all. So I'm happy to talk where, if you think it's a particular venue and we can look at it specifically, but we have found that more and more people are able to get access or get assistance from a parish or a resident association or get help that way or come to us direct. So it's something we can keep looking into. Happy to talk direct if there's anything specific. In terms of breaking down the consultation results, absolutely. So you've seen in previous exercises, we move forward to future stages. We do try and then break down the comments in much more detail. Who made the comments? So, you mentioned developers or promoters, also statutory consultees. They obviously have a key function, so they're very much worth pulling out. So that's our job now, to really condense, go through and pull out the issues, because it really is the issues that we're focused on. And we'll look to draw out that information much more clearly, so we can have those discussions around drawing the themes more clearly. Again, if there's specific issues about viewing the data or user, please provide me that feedback, because we do find feedback useful.
Chair, also just to add to that, I think we actually had quite a conversation as well, given that we were in the midst of a kind of COVID pandemic, about even the face-to-face meetings that we had, and obviously the difficulty with multi-use physical assets like this. You need to then manage that very carefully at the particular time. But John's right, we're very keen on exploring ways in which we might both improve the utility of digital means, but also enrichen the engagement. And the service has done some further work looking at social media and whether or not you can understand planning commentary through social media and so on, and try and harness it. And it's an art, not a science. And I think you can't codify it easily. And of course, what the planning process requires is a degree of rigor about the data that we're capturing and an understanding that we can audit it and be clear about it. But we're continually looking to try and find ways of improving it and contextualize it with as much background data on the profile and type of respondent.
Yes, just to say, I would like to take you up on your offer, because we did talk to Hannah, the Green Leaders Community Forum, talked to Hannah about what we could have done locally, and we ran up against some barriers, and particularly barriers around time. So if we can have conversations well in advance of the next consultation, maybe we can do it a bit better next time. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Can I now ask Lewis to ask his question? Thank you.
Well, hopefully I can be heard okay. Yep. So it is a very rich set of data in terms of the quality of the material that's been generated, and that reflects, as others have said, including Councillor Bick, that this was a thoughtful engagement, and that doesn't always happen on local plans. What I'd particularly be interested in is if officers could have a dialogue with the subgroup that's leading and a few other leading members about sort of which issues really matter to look in greater detail into. So one of them for me is this is a plan. It is about selections of sites for development. It includes a focus particularly on strategic sites, and it's about the quantum as well as the range of views about the challenges. So I would like personally to see a bigger drilling down into the comments on the strategic sites, including Northeast Cambridge, including Cambourne. And I'd just like there to be a dialogue in that zone. I'd also think that building on what Councillor Scott and Councillor Thornborough talked about, the actual livability of the development really matters. So I think that the plan is an opportunity for residents and councillors to set a higher bar. They won't all be like Marmalade Lane, but I do think that some of those comments are very valuable. My third comment is nearly 75% of the responses, Chair, came from people over the age of 50. And whilst I would like the voices of people over the age of 50 to be listened to, I am concerned that the data has a bias in it if you just took it as this being the only source. So my question would be, how can we engage younger people better and ensure that their views are really considered, and their views are likely to be stronger on environmental issues, but they're also likely to be stronger on the lack of affordable housing. That's my point. I have got some concerns about the length of this process and planning fatigue, particularly for people who are not sort of really engaged. So we do need to think about engagement in the future stages, or we'll just we won't have those other voices. So, and that again will lose the voice of younger people. So I think there's so much data and so much qualitative comments. I really would like to see that focused hard on a number of priorities and members' views brought into that, because in conducting that work, it's important that it's targeted. And I do think that there are 4 or 5 probable standout issues there. So thanks for the opportunity for at distance contribution. It's been a very good debate.
Thank you, Lewis, and a debate that's been made all the richer for those really excellent comments. Thank you for that. I thought those comments stood on their own. John, do you want to make some? Yeah, of course, thank you.
So just to highlight, the age profile that's being highlighted was part of a voluntary survey on demographics, and it was only down to the people that chose to fill it in. So I don't think it's a useful feedback, possibly not the entire age profile. So we need to just be slightly careful around it. I would say, obviously, we have a real wide range of issues throughout the package. So we do have the quick survey, the detailed comment, and the event records, which went to specific audience. So I hope we have a greater balance than is shown in that table.
Thank you for that, John. I think Councillor Herbert's made a really powerful point, because a simple fact, demographic fact, this plan is for young people. It's not for us old people. A lot of us will not be here in 2040. We've got to think about the future generations, so it's going to be their views that count the most. I'm sorry to break that sad news to some colleagues, but that's the
cheerful.
It's life. That's the fact, isn't it? We are planning for the next generation, and we need to be leaving this place a better place than that we found it in. That's our responsibility, and I think our previous generations haven't actually lived up to that responsibility. It's down to us to do that. So I think it's really a really powerful point, and I think what Lewis has said about making sure that the next rounds of consultation, we do capture those lost voices, and we do hear them. Thank you. Councillor Pora, please.
Oh, you got both the Katies. I just want to chat, I think you said that Caroline will be speaking shortly about timescale, so I'll reserve those questions. I just had a few comments on the feedback, which I did mention to Hannah previously, so I think hopefully you can do it. When we look at this coming back, it would be so useful to have information about who commented. So, for example, were they in the city, were they in South Cam? Obviously, everything's valid, but it helps sort of balance. Was the demand for more sites only from developers? Because obviously, in terms of how we weight things, I think I'm picking up on points several others have made, Councillor Davis, Councillor Page, and that is really useful for us. And it's also really useful, I think, to see the balance where officers are making a suggestion, sort of what grounds it's made on, and where, for example, we might have input to say, well, if we change that balance slightly, does that change what we do? So, I mean, I welcome it coming back again to us, but the more we can have about, well, the sort of the data details, as you say, I know we can't always guarantee it for demographics because it was a voluntary survey, but it does really help to know where it's coming from. Because obviously you could have a situation where everyone in the city says build over there and everyone outside says build in there, whereas on the other hand, we could have an equal weighting, and that will make a difference, I think, for our deliberations on this, because I think we're cross-party, we want this to be a successful local plan. So the more you can provide about, and in effect, the balance of what you're doing, a bit like in planning committee, why you're thinking this recommendation is more valid and what weight you're giving would, I think, personally be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. I'm going to ask Katie Thornborough, please, now.
Yes. Following on from what Councillor Herbert was saying, we, even before this last consultation, we were aware that we really want to do more youth engagement, and there is a programme with shared service in placemaking workshops with youth engagement, and it's very much one of our priorities to look into how consultations can reach our younger residents. I also am very aware that we need to reach out to residents from BAME residents, and the harder to reach. But I also know that the consultation undertaken by the shared planning service is really quite exemplar compared to other ones in the past or others around the country. And we can always do better, but we've got an extraordinary number of results, and hopefully we'll get more from younger people. But I do think we need to recognise that this has been a very comprehensive consultation. Thanks.
Can I just check with Lewis whether that's a legacy hand, or do you want to come back? I'll have to make a cup of tea. Okay. Well, Councillor Bick, are you wanting to come back?
Yeah, Chair, if I could just very briefly make a comment. I think I really agree with all those that have said that we must hear from younger people, and so just to reinforce that. But I think that when you think about the scope of what we're trying to achieve here, the other thing that needs to be said is we really need to be considering the people who aren't here yet at all, but may need to be at some time in the future. And those are people we can't find. We don't know who they are at the moment, and that they're not available to be spoken to. And it speaks really to the fact that in addition to all those current residents of the city and Greater Cambridge that we want to enrol in this process, and we want to have their views, we are also going to need to make sure that we consider the forecasts, the analyses, the trends, which are going to help us assess what the city is going to need to be for people who want to be here in the future. And it's difficult to find faces for those people, but we need to set that alongside the views of people who are already here.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bick. We certainly can't consult the unborn. That is a problem, but they exist in forecasts. You are quite right saying that. We now move on to the next part of this agenda paper. So what we're looking to do in this next stage of this item is seek agreement to revise timetable for future stages of the local plan and also the North East Cambridge Area Action Plan as set out in the update to the Greater Cambridge Local Development Scheme. And I'm going to ask Caroline to introduce that part of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, moving on, I think that's there. So, we have an obligation as a local planning authority to prepare, keep up-to-date timetables for the plans that we intend to prepare. It's called a local development scheme. And the current LDS was adopted in 2020 based on the information as we understood it at that point in time. Obviously, we've done a lot of work since then in developing the preferred options, the first proposals that we consulted on. And in light of the information that's come forward in our preferred strategy, there are a couple of factors in particular that mean we need to look again at our timetable and to update it. They are, firstly, the issue of water supply. Now, members will recall when we agreed those first proposals for consultation that we were very clear as councils that those first proposals were contingent on appropriate evidence becoming available as we prepare the plan, that there will be an appropriate and sufficient water supply without causing unacceptable environmental harm. And that evidence isn't available at the moment, and therefore our consultation was absolutely contingent on that evidence becoming available to us. So there's been lots of consultations with the water industry and with Water Resources East as the regional water body to understand their emerging proposals, to stress to them the emerging strategy, our identified development needs, and therefore what we need by way of water supply in order to bring forward a local plan that meets those identified needs. We know that both Water Resources East and the water companies, both Cambridge Water and Anglian Water, are preparing water management plans, so there'll be a draft water resources plan published for consultation in autumn this year, and at a similar time frame, water resource management plans, more detailed plans from those water companies coming forward. And we need to see the evidence that comes forward in those draft plans before we move forwards with the next stage of the local plan. And that's impacted on the timetable that we are now proposing to you. Or we can move forward to the more formal stages of plan making, proposed submission stage. So everything we're doing up to now and even next year will be under what's called Regulation 18, the issues and options, developing your plan. Before we can get to the Regulation 19 stage, the proposed submission stage, we need to have evidence in front of us that gives us confidence that our plan is going to be deliverable. And therefore we need to see what those final water resource plans say, and they're due in autumn 2024. So we need to see what they say before we can get to that next formal stage. The second big issue is around the development consent order process for the relocation of the Cambridge wastewater treatment plant, which enables the significant regeneration of the area of the water treatment works and the surrounding area that's currently constrained by the existence of the plant and the odour contours around it. Now, we knew that a plan that had North East Cambridge within it would be constrained by and have to follow the outcome of that development consent order process if approved. And we put in the 2020 local development scheme 2 options, one for a plan that relied on North East Cambridge and one for a plan that didn't. And we might have been able to go a bit faster for a plan that didn't. But members, you'll all recall that our first proposals has North East Cambridge as a really core part of the development strategy, that our evidence identified it as the most sustainable location available to us for development, and therefore the proposed revision to the local development scheme recognises that we are now have a plan that relies on North East Cambridge, and therefore the timetable needs to reflect that. So we need to wait for the outcome of the development consent order, and obviously it needs to be approved. The timetable for that DCO process has been changed since the 2020 local development scheme assumptions. The outcome is now most likely to be in winter, early 2024, rather than autumn 2023. So a slippage by a few months, number of months. Therefore, the member decision on the Greater Cambridge Local Plan and actually the North East Cambridge AAP and subsequent publication and consultation on that has to follow the outcome of the DCO. And that's particularly important because at that stage, that Regulation 19 stage, that is the plan that has to be the plan that members believe is ready to be submitted for examination and ready to be adopted. Because once you carry out that last publication, consultation, perhaps not quite the right word, because it's the opportunity for people to make representations, but those representations, if they involve any changes to the plan, we have to go around that loop of consultation again. The representations made at the Regulation 19 stage, effectively register them, we pull them together and we send them off to the plan, with the plan to the inspector for that independent examination. So it's quite important to understand that the consultation phases are the stages we've done so far and the stage we intend to do next year. And therefore, that change in timetable to the DCO outcome also impacts on the timetable for the local plan. I think it's also fair to say that we've reflected a little on the stages, the time we need between those different stages of consultation to make sure we're not underestimating the time we need both to register the representations, consider the issues raised, and make sure we bring a robust report back to the members to agree the next stage in the process. And we think we needed perhaps a little bit more time than we'd estimated in the previous local development scheme. Because obviously we want to make sure that our plan is robust and capable of being found sound at the end of the process. So what does all that mean to the timetable? Why is that not moving? No, right on. There we go. So we now envisage that we will bring the draft plan, full draft local plan for consultation to members in summer next year, and that we will then move on to consultation in autumn 2023. However, we are also proposing an interim stage before we get there, which is not shown on the timetable there because it's not a public stage in terms of a consultation. But what we're proposing to do is to bring a report through the member meetings in January for the strategy for the plan, in particular the development needs and the sites that we propose to meet those needs. So we're updating our evidence on the need for jobs and homes to check whether our current evidence is sound, and that will take account of things like COVID, but it'll also take account of some very strong interest there is around in this area at the moment for employment in particular as well, and we want to make sure that our needs are up to date and robust. And we will consider the implications of that for allocations and to change what that might mean for the sites that we're proposing. So we propose to bring a report to members in January, and what that does mean is that you have the opportunity to consider the results of the consultation and the content of the plan, and reach confirm the content of the plan that you would like us as officers to prepare, and we go away and then draft that full plan and bring that through to you in that stage process, because that feels to us a really important step in the process, and gives you really a meaningful opportunity to, doesn't waste time either in terms of us drafting something that isn't necessarily the plan that members would like. Beyond that, the publication of the proposed submission plan, as I said, that needs to follow the outcome of the water supply evidence, but also in particular the development consent order process and the implications of that, and bringing that a report through the member process and out to consultation means that we anticipate that publication and consultation in autumn 2024. And then to ensure that we properly consider all the representations that we've received, bring that all together, and then ask members to agree the plan to be submitted for examination. We anticipate that would actually happen in summer, autumn 2025, depending on how quickly we can get to that process. Once you submit, we're in the hands of the inspector, but we would certainly be hoping for a streamlined process and compared to the experience that we had for our adopted plan, for example. I think the other two things just to mention briefly is that we're aware that this timetable extends the time before we have a new plan in place. Even under the 2020 local development scheme, we wouldn't have had an adopted plan in place on the 5th anniversary of our adopted plans, which is autumn next year. And some members may be aware that national planning policy says we need to review our plan every 5 years. So what we are proposing is to undertake a review of our adopted plans and our policies against the current national policy as it is around the middle of next year, and to bring a report to, we would hope, to confirm that our plans are still sufficiently up to date to be given full weight in decision making beyond that 5-year anniversary. But that's how we intend to deal with that particular situation. And then lastly, obviously we're mindful of the government's levelling up and regeneration bill, and that we could end up with quite a different plan making system at some point during the process of preparing this plan. And obviously we need to keep that on a close eye on that. The work that we're doing on strategy and needs and so on, we would anticipate is absolutely something we would need to be doing even under a new system. But obviously we need to keep that very much under review. And thank you, Chair, that's by way of introduction to the item.
So, Councillor Bagent.
Yes, Chair, perhaps more strategy than questioning about what we've heard today. I'm quite interested in the idea of the 5-year anniversary, and wondering, would that give us an opportunity to consider updating the plan to the city's new climate emergency, biodiversity emergency situation? And so could we bring in some changes to the plan that may really underpin that at that stage. And my other thought is that we've just heard about a potential development of the Beehive, which is, if approved, would provide for 6,000 new jobs in the city. We potentially have another development of a technology centre in Cherry Hinton, which would potentially bring in something like 2,000 jobs. Is our plan sufficiently robust to allow that? My last point is just a reminder of something Gove said a few weeks ago, that we are, us and Oxford, are jewels in the crown, and that development of housing has got to take place in these areas, however unpalatable it may be. And I wondered if that opened up a space to talk to him at his level about our water difficulty.
I start, and then I'm sure Caroline will correct me. She can't kick me under the table here. But in terms of your point about updating the plan, the only way of updating a local plan is through the local plan process. I think what we're expecting through the local plan review is to validate the assumptions of the existing plan, so that in planning decisions, as Caroline's highlighted under the NPPF, the NPPF will trump a 5+ year local plan unless you can evidence that it's up to date. And we believe, in fact, because your last local plan, although with hindsight is not as forward-looking as the current ambitions that you have, some of the components of that plan were forward-looking for their day. And we obviously want to make sure that we retain locally the primacy of local policy making rather than national policy, and that you maintain control through your local plan of development. So we can't, Caroline might correct me, but I don't think we can change, for example, some of our policy standards and so on. But what we can do is make sure that, for example, the development strategy, the housing trajectory, the way that we're looking at sites, the protection of spaces and green belts and the allocations has primacy in plan making decisions, so that it continues to validate. The risk otherwise is that they fall away, and the development essentially argues, well, throw that one out of the door, let's follow what national policy says. So that's the purpose of the interim review. We need to do that as close as possible to the anniversary in some respects, because the government has talked about national development management policies coming out, it's talked about further guidance and so on, and we would want to be able to make sure that we were keeping our plan, we were reviewing our plan against the position then. So I don't think we can achieve what we might wish to of a kind of step change in our policies without a change to the local plan. Caroline's shaking her head, but I think she's agreeing with me. So,
but she would, wouldn't she?
In terms of the position about yes, Cambridge is special. Everywhere is special, but has a very vibrant economy. The work that we are doing, partly as a consequence of the challenges that we receive, both sides, from we don't need any, and also from both those that believe but also those that believe that our plan isn't ambitious enough in terms of levels of future growth and Brexit. The evidence base that is work that's going on to tell you whether or not the assumptions and the forecasts that we're using right, or they need adjustment, and if they need adjustment, what that means for sites. We don't plan on going into detailed development management policies and so on, but as Caroline said, the purpose is to highlight that the strategy and the direction that the plan is going in continues to be relevant, rather than get to autumn next year and everyone disagrees with the strategy.
Agent.
I'm trying not to appear pedantic, but Your language was you didn't think. Is that really code for that we can't change it to update it to modern standards that we'd like to use for development and things like that?
I just endorse what Stephen has said. We can't change the local plan without going through the process that we're actually doing for our emerging plan. So in order to give the weight of development plan, there is no shortcut. So unfortunately, we do need to go through the process we are with the Greater Cambridge Local Plan in order to formally update our standards. I guess what we do, though, is keep an eye on every available opportunity there may be, either in changes to the NPPF or things like the statutory change to require 10% biodiversity net gain coming in next autumn, and the sort of measures that we're doing now to respond wherever we can to try and give as much weight as we can for members in decision making as possible. But what we can't do is update the development plan more quickly than the timetable we're putting before you.
Just to supplement that, the only thing that will apply is obviously that as the plan progresses through its latter stages, you're entitled to give some weight to those emergent policies, but in some respects a lot of water has to flow down the CAM through national changes in national policy, through levelling up paper and so on, before we get to a Regulation 19, for example, version of the plan, which we're submitting into examination. So the review for next year is going to need to focus on wherever we're at that point.
We are further aided by the tailwinds of the market and consumer choice. And actually, it's incumbent on people in the marketplace, house buyers, home buyers, to actually make it clear to developers what they want to see. They want to see higher standards of construction, lower energy buildings, and the builders will respond to that. And that's what we need to encourage people to do as consumers, because that's a more powerful voice in many ways that we can apply through ageing planning policy. So I make an appeal to the public to do that. Katie, is your point relevant to what we've just discussed? May I? Yes, I'll...
I think we are also going to be updated about any changes to legislation, like improvements on the NPPF. We know that the LTN 120 is something we can refer to. So I think is at the end of next year we will have a formal update about the current local plan and any legislation changes that we could refer to as material weight in planning applications.
Thank you. Katie Pora, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So first off, I understand and support the idea to delay, to go with the new timescale. I think it's particularly important to wait for the water resource report because that's so important, because actually, if that comes back saying no more water, we will going to have to, go back to the drawing board. So I agree that's important. I also welcome the extra committee stage. I think certainly, for example, with the NEC Area Action Plan, when it came back to this committee, it was kind of yes or no. So anything we can get in earlier where we can actually have our say. So I think Councillor Davies, myself and Councillor Bick, would have liked to perhaps look a bit more about the weightings and have some input. So that is very welcome as well, because I think it is important it comes back as options, not decisions by officers, but obviously with justification for why they're going in a certain direction. To pick up on Councillor Bajan's point, I had very similar. My only concern, and there's some irony, is we're obviously delaying the big plan date to sort the water issue, hopefully, or at least have more information. But in doing that, we aren't going to be able to update our local plan as quickly to do things like the water per household, which I know we're keen to reduce, biodiversity net gain, which obviously we're picking up through other means. I was thinking about office space. one of the consistent things that's annoying on committee is, you know, we are a cycling city. I know Councillor Smart references a lot. You know, we have such a high use that even LTM 120 is pretty much out of date for us already. So again, it was, I suppose, wondering if the chair and the exec council would be willing to sort of work together cross-party to look at areas in the plan where perhaps a new evidence base is a priority for us, because I understand that the local plan can't be changed, but I know that we can give weight to new evidence where, for example, not only is the plan robust, but in these instances, like Councillor Bajan said, we want it to be more robust in some areas. So I'd just welcome views on how we could do that, and whether you would allow us as a committee and perhaps the planning committees as well to contribute where we think there are areas where our plan will be particularly out of date, which is nobody's fault, just things are moving very, very quickly, and it's obviously a 5, 6, 7 year process. So I'd welcome any comments on that.
Thank you, Councillor Pora. I'm particularly attracted by your comment that we work cross-party on a local plan. The process is so long that it's absolutely, and lasts for such a long time. It's fundamental that there is cross-party support for a plan. If anyone, there was any change of administration, God forbid, then another party wanted to unravel the plan, it would be a disaster, actually. So it's good that is a shared understanding between us. We'll really welcome that. I think we can address the point that you're just raising in the next agenda item, which is the Cambridge and Peterborough Local Transport and Connectivity Plan. There's some elements within that I think were relevant to the points you're making. So can we just defer that point and pick it up there?
I was just thinking of the example of the water usage. It's just to see what's possible, to kind of try and understand what we could do to allow us to give more weight to the things that perhaps we feel are important. So I don't know if an officer could comment on that before the transport issue.
Well, it's just, I mean, in a sense, it's a similar comment in that the local plan is following its pathway. That doesn't mean that officers across the council are not working with the utility providers, statutory agencies and so on even Cambridge Water's water resource management plans, and pushing hard in those arenas around water consumption, starting to work with the Environment Agency as well. So it's wrong to say it would be an opportunism, but the council, you know, if Andrew Lynn was sitting here now, he'd also be highlighting our work on climate change and net zero carbon and so on. So planning is one of the tools. We will continue as a council to use all the tools available to try and advance us as far forward as fast as we can. And one component of that, I would say, is you know, reflecting the continued ambition in the planning process is important. We might not be able to give it weight, but the chair has pointed to consumer behaviour, and you know, officers are, along with members I know, trying to do their very best to make sure that developers and those people bringing forward development are as ambitious for Cambridge as we are in the schemes, and we'll continue to do that. Whether it's conversations, as I said, at the regional level through the various forms of government.
Do I have any more people want to speak on this matter? Well, otherwise, I'll take it to a vote. No? Okay, thank you very much. Before we do that, I just want to say how much we appreciate the work that the officers have done on the consultation. It is an extraordinary amount of work that's gone into that, a substantial body of work, and as Councillor Herbert said, it's provided rich data sources, and we do need to be able to now turn that data into intelligence to help inform and help us make a better plan, because I think that's what the public wanted when they responded to these consultations. It's their voices that we want to make sure that their voices really count and have had an impact. on this plan. And I think some points have been well made about how the data should be analysed and what we should do kind of better next time. So thank you very much. And I do hope that the voice of this committee and the appreciation is communicated to everybody involved in that. So I now just turn to the vote. The recommendations then are as follows. The Executive Council is recommended to note the representations made to the Greater Cambridge Local Plan First Proposals Preferred Options Consultation and the report on the consultation at Appendix 1. Agree to adopt the updated local development scheme for Greater Cambridge, included at Appendix 2 of the report, to take effect from Monday the 1st of August 2022. And third, agree to grant delegated authority to the Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development in consultation with the South Cambridgeshire District Council Lead Cabinet Member for Planning and the Cambridge City Council Executive Councillor for Planning and Infrastructure in consultation with Chair and Spokes to make any minor editing changes and corrections identified to the updated local development scheme for Greater Cambridge included at Appendix 1 of the report prior to publication. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. That's unanimous, thank you. Now we turn to, oh, sorry, yes, important bit.
Yes, thank
Can
you
you
very
accept
much.
the recommendation?
Thank you for all the comments from this committee members and the chair. All really appreciated, and I accept your recommendation.
Councillor Thornborough. We now turn to agenda item 7. This is the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Local Transport Connectivity Plan, Draft Plan Consultation Response.
To interrupt you in your flow, Chair, but are we going to take a break anytime soon, do you think? It's 2 hours, I need to go for a wee, the laptop is already dead, there's no electricity in the room, that sort of thing.
I think we can all agree that. 10 minutes? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we now turn to we now turn to agenda item 7 on page 205, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Local Transport and Connectivity Plan, draft plan consultation response. This item is non-key and was not called in for scrutiny and debate. Therefore, we should go straight to the vote. But before we do, would I remind members of the updates the officer has provided, which members were sent a copy. If you have any questions, please contact the Principal Planning Policy Officer, whose details are on the document. Now, before we proceed, I did mention this report to Councillor Pora, and I just want to draw her attention to section 317 with references to the work that's going to be carried out for the updating of the Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire transport strategy, and the child documents listed there in the bullet points: local walking and cycling plan, active transport strategy, rights of way improvement plan, which are county council documents, county-wide documents. Those documents are in preparation. And also the City Council's Making Space for People supplementary planning document, which will be being brought forward in parallel with the local plan. And a lot of the issues you're wanting to raise and discuss on a cross-party basis, I think we will find them emerging through there. So we will now go to the vote. When I read the recommendation. So the recommendations are: the Executive Council is recommended to A, agree the proposed response to the draft local transport and connectivity plan consultation set out in Appendix 1. B, consider and agree any material changes to the response to the draft local transport and connectivity plan consultation proposed by South Cambridgeshire District Council in consultation with the Chair and spokes of the Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee and in liaison with the South Cambridgeshire Lead Cabinet Member for Planning. And C, agree to grant delegated authority to the Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development in liaison with the South Cambridgeshire Lead Cabinet Member for Planning and the Cambridge City Council Executive Council for Planning and Infrastructure to make any minor editing changes to the response to the draft local transport and connectivity plan consultation. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Councillor Big? He's not voting. Okay, so he's not here. Yeah, of course, sorry. It'd be nice to see a hand. So that's carried. So, Executive Council, will you accept that recommendation?
Yes, I will accept it, thank you.
So we now go to agenda item 8.235 on your agenda papers.
That's a sort of point of order. I was just interested to know. So obviously we haven't had these meetings with some members online and some in the room, and the members in the room voting and the members that are online not voting in the past. So I'm just curious to know what the position is of those members that are attending the meeting but are not voting. So do we assume that they're voting in favour of the vote or against it or abstaining or just something else altogether?
I made a mistake. No, of course, people who are not in the room cannot vote.
No, you misunderstand, Charles. I'm just curious to know what the position of those members is. You know, as an authority, we want to work together with all parties, of course. And I'm just curious to know, you know, so going forward, that decision we just made there, can we presume that members who are not in the room are supportive of that decision? Or are they not? Or do we not know?
I think it would be wrong in law to presume one way or the other of any member who of how a member would vote, and you can't. The legislation prevents member. Obviously, particularly for items like this where there is no comment, you know, people who observe the committee meeting would see the comments from those who are not in the room as part of the debate of the meeting, but not the decision. But I think where there is no debate, I think it would be unwise to make any assumption about the individual members of the meeting, because they simply can't express a position.
Councillor Scott.
In my view, a prudent councillor who was not in the chamber, if she or he did want to have on record a concern about a particular matter, in my opinion, would comment on that matter to make their position clear, albeit I accept absolutely that they're not voting and therefore there can't be considered to be a record of a vote in relation to them. But all I can say is that if I were not in the room, I would actually be making a clear statement of, you know, comment at least about the particular matter.
I think that's the case.
As a prudent councillor.
Yeah. I think that's the case if you can, but these items are not in front of the committee for discussion, I think is the.
So, agenda item 8, page 235 on your agenda papers, neighbouring local plan consultation responses. Again, this item is non-key and was not called in for scrutiny and debate. Therefore, we should go straight to the vote. But before we do, I would remind members of the update the officer has provided, which members were sent a copy. If you have any questions, please contact the Principal Planning Policy Officer. We'll now go to the vote. So I will read out the recommendations. The Executive Council has recommended to 1, agree the proposed response to the West Suffolk Local Plan Preferred Options Regulation 18 consultation as set out in Appendix 1, and the proposed response to the Bedford Borough Local Plan 2040 Plan for Submission Regulation 19 as set out in Appendix 2. Point 2, agree that any material changes to the responses to the West Suffolk Local Plan Preferred Options Regulation 18 and the Bedford Borough Local Plan 2040 Plan for Submission Regulation 19 arising from consideration by South Cambridgeshire District Council will be agreed via an out-of-cycle decision by the Executive Council for Planning and Infrastructure in consultation with the Chair and Spokes for the Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee and in liaison with the South Cambridgeshire Lead Cabinet Member for Planning. 3, agree to grant delegated authority to the Joint Director of Planning and Economic Development in liaison with the South Cambridgeshire Lead Cabinet Member for Planning and the Cambridge City Council Executive Council for Planning and Infrastructure to make any minor editing changes to the responses to the West Suffolk Local Plan Preferred Options Regulation 18 and the Bedford Borough Local Plan 2040 Plan for Submission Regulation 19. All those in favour, please raise your hand. It's unanimous and therefore carried. Can the Executive Council accept the recommendation?
I can, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Items 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14 record of decisions. I propose that I ask members to note the decisions en bloc unless there are any comments to be made. Could I ask the committee to note the following? Item 10, Emerging Water Resources Regional Plan Consultation Response, page 249. ROD means record of decision. So item 10, ROD. DEFRA Consultation on Biodiversity Net Gain, page 253. Item 12, ROD. Greater Cambridge Housing Trajectory and 5-year Housing Land Supply, page 255. Item 13, ROD. Cambridge Wastewater Treatment Plant Relocation, Phase 3 Consultation, page 257. And item 14, Rod, Greater Cambridge Brownfield Register 2021, page 261. If members want to take the above individually, please do so, but remind them the decision's been made, so there should be limited comments. So, are you now going to bring us to vote on that, please? So, if you could, we do it en bloc, will you please raise your hand in favour? That's carried. Unanimous? So we can ask the Executive Council to accept the recommendation.
Yes, I'm very happy to accept all of those recommendations.
Thank you.
Can I also add that to thank you for your chairing this committee. It's your first time chairing the Scrutiny Committee, and I think it was well chaired. And I'd also like to thank the previous chair, Councillor Dave Bajan, who was Scrutiny Chair last year and did it very well. So thank you,
Dave. I think we should have a round of appreciation for Dave's work last year. It's the right thing to do. Thank you, Dave. So thank you. That now concludes the Planning and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. Please could I ask that everyone take their own rubbish home? And if anyone has used any glasses, please could they return them to the red trays outside the committee report. And finally, I'm sure you'd want to join me in thanking everybody who's participated in this meeting and has watched the recording, and of course pay tribute to all the officers who've contributed to the production of the agenda papers. It's been a really very interesting set of documents and of a very, very high standard, and thank you very much for that.
I have put in a request to change the date of the next meeting. It's going through some process, but to see if that is viable or not. Thank you.
That's the end of the meeting.